Hello, welcome to this University of Brighton podcast. I'm Richard Newman. This week, Dr. Kevin Wyche, Principal Lecturer in Atmospheric Science, is my guest. Topical as we talk about one of the other effects of the coronavirus pandemic and the impact it's having on our environment. Hi, Kevin. First of all, how are you finding lockdown?
Hi, Rich. I'm all right, thank you. It's going okay. Yeah, I like to be out and about, so I'm not really enjoying it that much, but it is what it is, and we've got to do what we've got to do.
Yeah, regarding teaching and staying in contact with students and colleagues, how's that gone generally?
Yeah, that's gone really quite smoothly. I started testing Microsoft Teams just before this whole thing hit, so one of my classes was up and running with it already. So yeah, that's all gone quite smoothly, really.
Yeah. Fairly pleasantly surprised with it, I guess. I mean, it's been quite a decent enough response from students and colleagues. I think people got used to it quite quickly.
Yeah, I think they did. I mean, the digital age has moved on really rapidly, and we're all everyone's got their own smart device now. So I think people were used to using all the various sort of WhatsApp type platforms. It's really similar. So it's integrated really seamlessly.
Yeah. Okay, right. Let's get stuck into the podcast. Let's start, I think, with getting to know a bit about you first. So what are your main areas of interest, and can you give us a brief summary of your background?
Yeah, so I'm an atmospheric scientist. My background is, I did my first degree, my BSc degree in physics with space science. And then I did an MSc specializing in atmospheric science, before going on to do a PhD in physical chemistry, which was all about building instrumentation to monitor the Earth's atmosphere. So yeah, my research and my teaching is all about trying to understand the fundamental mechanics of the Earth's atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Where did your interest probably all stem from this?
Probably all came from the whole space science thing. I wanted to be a rocket scientist originally.
Right.
So my undergrad degree was a lot of modules around, how to put things in space, how to put things in orbit, and how we can use these satellites to monitor the Earth and its atmosphere. So I guess I kind of got the bug from there, really. It's sort of space science side. I started off at the top of the atmosphere, working at the Earth-Space Interface, looking at how, extraterrestrial material ablates in the atmosphere and creates all sorts of metal layers and exotic stuff in the upper atmosphere, and slowly settle closer down to where I am nowadays, doing mostly things to do with air quality.
So getting to know a little bit about the younger Kevin then, the whole interest was there kind of like quite an interest in space when you were a child? Was that a big interest growing up?
Yeah, my dad was into astronomy, and
Okay.
So I kind of grew up around that sort of thing. And I kind of always wanted to do that sort of, I've always been a bit of a physics nerd, so I've always kind of been interested in, fundamentally how stuff works. And when I got the opportunity to do my undergrad degree in physics and space science, it kind of all snowballed from there, really.
Okay, so one of the main reasons we got you in this week was to talk about coronavirus and the impact that's had on other aspects of life and air quality and the potential impacts that they're kind of having on one another. So first, it might be best to tell us about the Advanced Atmospheric Research Observatory up at Falmer before we get into asking some of the more fundamental questions, I guess.
Yeah, so we're really lucky here in Brighton. We had a project a few years ago now, back to 2015, I think, was when the station was launched, where we had some money from the EU to develop a network of next generation air pollution monitoring networks, where the stations would have, I guess, what you would consider research grade equipment in them, rather than the standard sort of off-the-shelf sort of things that you'd find on the street run by the councils and the government, to kind of push the boundaries and understand better the linkages between various sort of left field type of air pollutants, like ultrafine particles, say, which are these nanometer sized particles which will really, really penetrate and get right into the body, which aren't being monitored as standard. So to look at things like that and link it to health. So yeah, we've got this beautiful facility at Falmer, which is observing our atmosphere in real time, looking at a whole range of different gases and particles, different particle metrics, giving us information every minute of the day about the atmosphere.
Okay. So the first obvious question, and I realize we're going to go off in all kinds of directions from this. So I have a very complicated answer, but fewer vehicles on the roads, barely any planes in the sky. Are we seeing a huge positive impact on air quality?
We're seeing a huge change in the trace composition of the atmosphere. That's the first thing I'd say. I mean, we've all probably seen the headlines now, which have stated that air pollution over China gone down by about 30-40%, air pollution over Central Europe over 40%. What we're looking at here is nitrogen dioxide, which comes from car exhausts, and it comes from burning of fossil fuels. It's the most common air pollution indicator. If nitrogen dioxide is high, air pollution is bad. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, because the atmosphere is it's a real complex beast with thousands of different species in it and lots of different reactions going on. So because we're reducing the concentration of one thing, doesn't mean we're reducing the concentration of everything. We're shifting the balance of chemistry in the air. So we've just been, myself and some of my colleagues at an environmental consultancy called Florum nearby, have been working on a report for DEFRA, which we got in a few days ago, where we were looking at what's been happening in the southeast of the UK. So yeah, we've seen nitrogen dioxide levels go down. Here in Brighton, if we have a look at the satellite data, that tells us that the levels have gone down by about 40% compared to this time last year. But if we look at other pollutants in the air, like ozone, which is a really bad respiratory pollutant, we see that's going up about 20-30% compared to this time last year. So it's not quite as simple a picture as, okay, we're reducing cars, we're reducing NOx, we're reducing air pollution. So this is another thing that we're looking into at the minute, in that if we're reducing these big particles from the atmosphere that come out of your diesel exhaust and from your other like wood burning processes, things like that, domestic heating. If we're removing those sorts of things from the atmosphere, we're removing the ability for them to scavenge the tiny little particles, which are more harmful. So we could be looking at a scenario where we're getting a burst of more harmful secondary pollutants in absence of these primary pollutants that we normally expect in the air. So yeah, it's a bit of a complex scenario, and it's essentially what we've got now is one of the biggest, most, besides all of the terrible effects of coronavirus, obviously, it's a really big, exciting experiment in the atmosphere to kind of test what is going to happen in the future if we do manage to clean up our air.
So you're seeing that increase in ozone. What influence what impact could that have? Would we see any effect? What effects would we be seeing?
Yeah, ozone's a respiratory pollutant. So if we're increasing the concentration of a respiratory pollutant at a time when a lot of people are suffering from or vulnerable to a respiratory virus, then we could risk increasing the morbidity and mortality related with COVID-19.
Right. At the same time, is there any sort of link between pollution? So say we went back to before the coronavirus in lockdown was in effect. Was there any influence in the pollution and the transmission of a virus? So is poor air quality contributing to transmission as well? So does it kind of work two ways?
Yeah, there have been some really interesting rapid studies that have been put out over the last month or so. Some have been linking particles in the air to being vectors for the virus, for carrying the virus. These nanometer-sized viruses don't remain suspended in the air on their own particularly long. They live on surfaces, they live in liquid droplets. So it's possible that PM10, coarse particles, for instance, might be carrying the virus and might lead to a greater spread of it. There are studies looking at your historic exposure to air pollution and whether you're more or less susceptible to the effects of the virus. So those people who have been historically exposed to higher levels of air pollution seem to be suffering worse from the virus. So as you'd expect, because a lot of air pollutants affect the respiratory system.
Just drastic changes to the air quality. It's just and we've been talking for such a long time about the need for urgent action on climate change, and here we are now with this unprecedented situation where you kind of got two sides to it, haven't you? Where you've got balances changing, and you've also got the human side as well, where thousands of people are losing their jobs because major transport businesses are struggling. So we're not seeing this sort of there's been a push for acceleration, but this is a risk that this is almost too quick from the changes that you're seeing?
Yeah, I'd say that we need to learn from this episode. We need to take as much data as we can, and we need to analyse and understand it as rapidly as possible to try and inform policy going forward, so that we direct ourselves into the best possible scenario for a low carbon future.
The changes that you've seen, have they surprised you?
No, not really. When you look at the amount of traffic that's come off the roads, if you look at the traffic numbers, then no, it doesn't really surprise me. I'd be interested to see what happens as the summer goes on. We get a lot more photochemistry occurring in the troposphere as we get into the summer. So the atmosphere becomes more chemically active. We get a lot more ozone formed, for instance, many more secondary pollutants. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen going forward. We'll have to look at our models, look at our data that we've got now, and see what happens.
We wouldn't hold you to any kind of predictions, Kevin, but what would be your prediction when we all go back to this? Well, I guess something resembling normal. I mean, if these changes continue to happen and at the same sort of rate that they are, if suddenly everyone lockdown lifts and suddenly we're seeing cars being used a lot more, we're seeing more flights happening again, what could sort of happen chemically with that balance, where the balance has already shifted?
Yeah, if we have a look at China right now, which is returning back to some sort of normality, you can see that those levels of NO2 are coming up again. We don't know what, that we presume they're going to go back up to how they were previously. But I should imagine that what we'll get is a settling in the atmosphere quite rapidly back to the norm, what we've been expecting over the last few years.
Okay. Away from coronavirus, can we just touch on the work you're doing regarding the links between air pollution and degenerative brain disease?
Yeah.
So what work have you been doing now?
So I've been working with Dr. Alison Lansley from School of Pharmacy and Biological Sciences. And we've been looking at the ability of these so-called ultrafine particles. So the government currently monitor things called PM10 and PM2.5. So that's coarse particles and fine particles. Particles with a diameter of 10 micrometers. So you're talking, it's sort of like width of a human hair sort of scale, sort of beach sand sort of scale, down to 2.5 micrometers. So ultrafine particles on a nanometer scale. So they're an order of magnitude, they're several orders of magnitude lower. We're going down to 10 to the minus 9 now of a meter. And they're so small, they get through the defenses of the respiratory system and they get into the bloodstream. And there have been linkages, been epidemiological studies linking exposure to these ultrafine particles and degenerative brain disease and various other diseases as well. So we've been looking at the ability of these ultrafine particles, once they get into the bloodstream, to pass across the blood-brain barrier into the brain, and where they can have a range of different effects.
So how far? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Please finish your sentence. It's okay.
I was just going to say, so far we've set up a blood-brain barrier model, and we're looking at a range of different types of particles and different sizes, but we're currently in the process of looking at their ability to penetrate that barrier.
So, I mean, it's a really important issue, and a huge study. I mean, depending on what you find, how can that be prevented then from that affecting people, from causing these diseases?
Yeah, I think we need to learn a lot more about ultrafine particles. We need to learn more about where they're coming from. We know a lot of them come from car exhaust, but a lot of them are made in the atmosphere from atmospheric chemistry. So we need to understand sources better, where they're coming from, and how we can either reduce them at source or mitigate at source, capture them at source. There are a lot of, really cool sort of next generation particle trap techniques being worked on. But yeah, we need to understand more about where they're coming from, what they're made of, and how they distribute in the atmosphere.
Going back to the climate emergency, I mean, the world has completely changed in these last few months. The narrative, the news, the pushing for different campaigns. We've seen one huge conference which was meant to happen this year already postponed. Imagine you're deeply passionate about the fight against the climate change, Kevin. We've seen various commitments made by cities and countries around the world about going carbon neutral, Brighton going car free in its centre, for example, just in our own area. Do you think in general there's enough willing to reach these targets, or maybe accelerate them past the words? We see a lot of rhetoric, and we've seen it for years. Do you think the world's waking up now? I mean, I guess you have to answer this in a sort of pre-coronavirus world, really. Was the world waking up?
I'd say in areas very slowly, but the trouble is we're all of us, myself included, we're all heavily invested in those parts of our life that rely on processes that contribute to perturbation of the climate. We all, have these fossil fuel burning processes in our life, whether it's from charging our iPhone using power from a coal-fired power station, or whether it's getting in the car to go to work. We're all really invested in these things. So, I mean, a lot of people are looking at studies that, look into public perception and human behavior, where, how willing people are to, say, if you tell them one day, oh, look, it's going to be polluted in the city, please will you not drive when you get the buzz? Most people, if they're late, or, if they've got something particularly important to do that day, they'd be like, oh, no, it's fine. I'm just going to get the car. People are more invested in their lives and their tech and, their modern day comforts than the environment, really. That's very broad. Obviously, a lot of people are incredibly passionate about it, and a lot of people would make these changes. But on the whole, the research says that a lot of people will, take the standard easy option. So I guess it's, are our measures going far enough? Should we have more harder measures? We must do this. We'll stop doing that. We'll regulate against this. I think that's where we've come to. We've come to the point where we need more holistic, wider, more harder measures across nations.
That could work, obviously, hugely well. What about the data, like the data that you're collecting, that we see, and really seeing the environment changing and the impacts that we're all having on pollution, if that data was almost simplified and was put out there a lot more often, would people start to look at that and think, goodness me, this is too much? I mean, from like I'm talking like on a more micro level here, is everyone doing their bit, rather than, if we can't, if you can't look to your government, for example, in some countries and obvious ones, to do something about it, we all need to do it ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. We need to be better at communicating information about these environmental matters, not just air pollution, but across the board. I think some things that some anecdotal things in the air quality community that I find really interesting. Like there was a factory in Birmingham which was pumping out a whole range of different pollution emissions. No one said a thing. One day they by accident released a pink dye from whatever processes they were doing into the system, and the smoke was coming out pink. And the council received so many complaints across the board from the public. What's going on? This is polluting our air. But there was no real change in composition of the pollutants. So I guess with things like air pollution, we're invested in the stuff which generates it, like our cars, for instance. But it's also not very visible. If a river gets polluted with a contaminant, you can see it. If there's a flood, you can see it. It's harder to see air pollution, so it's less higher in public and political consciousness.
What about the changes that we're seeing from the younger generation as well, then? Because this is becoming such a big thing for younger people, of the obvious campaigning led by Greta Thunberg, for example. But how much optimism does that fill you with, that people of that generation, children that are, the future, are taking this so seriously?
Yeah, I think that's a great thing. You can see that. You can see that in the younger generations. We do things like the Big Bang Fair every year. We go and we do these sort of like kitchen experiments about the atmosphere with the kids, and you get that message from them that there's a level of concern even at that early age. I think they're being taught about these environmental issues really well at school nowadays. I think that's being integrated really well, and there's a clear concern. So we're passing this world over to the next generation. So I think it's important we start grassroots up in teaching them about the mistakes that I've gone on so far.
And then going back to the current situation we're in with coronavirus, you mentioned already about sort of behavioural, like, research on people's behavior, basically, and everyone's behavior is changing now throughout this pandemic. Do you think that people are going to review what they're doing a little bit more, maybe cut down on some things that they shouldn't be doing in terms of contributing to this? There's been a lot of talk about, this is the time to step back and reset and really think about what everyone's doing, when we go back to some sort of normal.
Yeah, the optimistic part of me would like to think so.
Yeah.
There's a lot we can learn from here, and maybe there's responsibility for, scientists like ourselves to make sure we pull information out of the data that we're collecting and present that in a way that everyone can see and understand and, take home messages from. I'm not so sure. Personally, I'm not so sure. I think people are, so desperate to return to how the way it was. Then, if we go back to looking at China, where restrictions are easing, the pollution levels are coming up again. So, well, let's wait and see.
Generally, though, right now in May 2020, where's your optimism level about where the world's heading in this fight?
Yeah, it's probably about 50% in the middle of the scale right now, because I can see some good things happening, but obviously on the the global political scale, on look at the big picture, you see some really alarming decisions that are being made. So Yeah, I'm not too sure. I mean, there's some great research going on. We're really pushing the boundaries and understanding about the fundamental mechanics of the Earth and its atmosphere, and how we're impacting its climate. Um, but yeah, it's our responsibility to make sure we inform the decision makers correctly, so they can make the best decisions.
Do you think that once we've come out of this situation and the world's been in some sort of lockdown and, restricting pollution, that the environment will be in a slightly better place?
Yeah, I think overall, for at least a time, the environment's going to come out as a better place. We're seeing, various elements of nature, starting to recover the spaces already, which is great to see. But yeah, I think what would concern me at the minute is, everyone's eagerness to get back to normality. What's going to happen in that gap, and how are we going to transition from a state of complete lockdown to normality. So I think personally, I'd say that's, we've got to stage that, and we've got to manage it, we've got to monitor it, across the spectrum, the political and public, the environmental spectrum.
Sure. We'll wait and see, and we'll watch your research with a lot of interest as well, and probably catch up about it shortly and figure out what's all come of it all. So at the end of each podcast, we ask some questions completely away from the conversation we've been having, and we all need a bit of a lighter mood every now and again during these times. So, okay, first question: what advice would you give to your younger self?
I'd probably say that you can do whatever you want if you put your mind to it. If you work hard, put a big shift in every day, you can achieve whatever you want. Work hard, be dedicated, and you can achieve your aims.
Good advice. Okay. If you could pick any other subject to study at the University of Brighton, what might it be?
Oh, that's a tough one. I went on a field trip to support one of my good buddies, Dr. Chris Carey, a few weeks ago before this all happened, and he just teaches archaeology, and that was really fascinating. So I really enjoyed that. So possibly geography with archaeology, or something like computer science for games, something like that. Because I guess I'm a big nerd at heart, so something like that.
What positive changes have you experienced in your personal life through lockdown?
Yeah, kind of, as I hinted at, I guess I'm a bit of a social butterfly, so I like being out and about. I'm not really enjoying the lockdown at all, but I guess not so much I guess it has sort of overlapped into my personal life, but obviously my research is ramped up. I'm, working, in my spare time, in my personal time, sort of trying to keep on top of the measurements that are coming out of the lab right now. And yeah, so I'd say, ramping up of the research really has been the big change in my personal life. It's more work in my personal life.
A passion, so that's a good thing. You're working something you're passionate about. That's a good thing. Okay, pick a favorite place in Sussex.
I'm a big fan of National Trust, and just down the road from me is Sheffield Park. It's a really beautiful place. It's an old Capability Brown garden and parkland. It's really, really beautiful. Or I guess just generally Ashdown Forest. I like riding through the forest on a lazy Sunday morning on my motorbike. So probably either Sheffield Park or the forest.
Okay. When lockdown is lifted, if you could give visitors to Brighton and the area a tip of what to do or experience for a weekend, what would you suggest?
Well, I don't know Brighton, the city very well. I guess if we say something in the city, I would say probably the Upper Garden Street Flea Market on a Saturday. That's something to experience. Outside of the city, I would say maybe Cuckmere Haven, somewhere like that. We take our first years there in Welcome Week. And as it comes into view over the downs, it's always this gasp of wow. And, people who don't know the area don't realise how beautiful it is around here. So, yeah, there's two for the price of one.
Good. Tell us something interesting about you, which a lot of people may not know.
I guess talked about a little bit earlier. Not many people know that I started out in space science. I'm a physicist, and started out looking at the Earth-space interface and the meteorites in the upper atmosphere, things like that. And before I came here to Brighton, I worked with the MOD, working on counter-terrorism stuff, looking at detection of chemical weapons and explosives and things like that, and doing frontline triage for the troops on the ground.
Wow. Okay. Cool. Very good. Final question then. If you could pick 3 people to host for a dinner party, they can be past or present, who would they be and why?
Okay, so I'd have to pick a physics hero, being a physics nerd. So probably in modern times, Stephen Hawking, maybe. Great person to have at the dinner table. Absolutely massive hero of mine. Amazing scientist. Big rugby fan, so probably have to pick Johnny Wilkinson. And I'm into my rock and metal music, so I'd probably pick someone like Joe Elliott from Def Leppard, someone like that. But having said that, having probably just like everyone else in the lockdown, I've binged on Netflix Tiger King, so I'd probably have Joe Exotic, Carol Baskin, and her first husband at the table.
Both of them, all 3. So that would be your 3. Sorry, Joe Exotic, Carol Baskin, and her husband. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah,
I need a mediator. Right.
I have to find what happened to him.
No spoilers for anyone who hasn't watched it yet. Look, Kevin, thank you so much for your time. Really interesting stuff.
You're most welcome. Good to be here.
If you like this podcast, you can subscribe to our YouTube podcast playlist and on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening and stay safe.